Hey everyone, welcome back. Shayne Combs here as always with my brother Matt Combs, and Matt, coming up on show 59 of Expanding the Zone, and this is going to be our basketball tip-off show as we've been talking so much about here in recent weeks throughout the social media. And on last week's show, we talked about things that leaders need to do to stay sharp. And I thought that was a lot of fun. I thought we've had some good feedback, but this is something we've been real excited to do, and that's kind of turn the page in the basketball season and really focus there. So as always, thank you to Dr. Chris Good for the support on the YouTube channel. If you're out there listening on the podcast app, check us out over on YouTube. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Feel free to look us up anywhere you find your podcast there, Expanding the Zone. I'd love to have you with us each and every week. And Matt, let's just talk a little bit about the basketball thoughts. Why this now, and why we think this could be something really neat for the podcast here moving into basketball season.
Well, Shane, we've done so many shows now, 58 or so shows, um, you know, surrounding different aspects of leadership. And that's not something we want to get away from forever, but we thought it might be fun to take a little bit of a break from that and really dive into what we know best, you and I, right? And what our lane kind of is, which is more of basketball. And with it being the start of basketball season and knowing that you and I are going to get to watch a lot of high school basketball, we thought it might just be fun to sort of dive into some of the finer details of it. We hope on this show to do some breakdown of some X's and O's from time to time. We hope to maybe dive into some specific teams in our immediate area. And I know a lot of our listeners are from the Ross County area, and we'll be watching some of these teams play too. And of course, we have some teams from other areas. We might even talk a little college basketball, on this show from time to time. Um, but I think that, for me, I'll watch basketball games, and I don't know about you, Shane, but like, especially last year for me, being my first year away from coaching, it was, I got to watch some basketball in a little bit of a different way. And it was fun for me to and I would get in my car and kind of think to myself, wow, that really turned the game there. Wonder kind of why that coach made that decision in that situation, or why that player made that, why that official maybe made that call, late in the game, that, all these things, right, that kind of happen. And it was just, you almost find yourself sort of talking to yourself in your head a little bit on the way home. And so the thought kind of came to my mind, maybe we should take some time in the winter months and just do a show more just centered around basketball specifically.
Yeah, I love the idea, and I think what's so neat about it is even though we're going to be talking basketball, I think anytime you're talking coaching, anytime you're talking a certain player doing something, the officials doing something, there's going to be leadership topics. There's going to be different things that come about. So I think there's still going to be plenty of that. So I'm excited to do it. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to ask you where do we start? You know what I mean? We're coming up here on the preseason a little bit. You look at your notes there, and you're thinking of all the years you've done this in terms of basketball. Coaches are going through all sorts of preseason things and all of these different things. What is the first thing that we need to talk about when we start talking about the great game of basketball here?
Well, I think since we're in that point here in early November, right, where coaches are really just kind of getting started. A lot of your boys coaches literally maybe just finished their first week if their football team was in the playoffs. Um, for some teams, they may not have even got started yet, right? If the football
Mhm.
team's still in the playoffs, but so we're early on in the process, and we did a show, and I would invite people to go back and listen uh, to that previous show we did last year on the preseason. Um, It was actually episode 47, Shayne. We did a show last year, invite people to go back and listen to that. And we hope tonight to talk about some different things. We don't want to just totally repeat that show, but I think there's some things, we weren't able to get to that we can dive into tonight a little bit. And I think where I would start, Shayne, and what comes to my mind is just what type of team, okay, not specifically naming a school necessarily, but what type of team, what type of coach, what type of coaching, right, leads to early season success, right? Because really, if you look at how a team performs in the first, like say up to Christmas, right? So from the beginning of December when games start through the Christmas break, when you look at that stretch of games, and it's different for each team, but let's say maybe it's 5 games, whatever, 6 games. What, in some cases more than that, right? But to me, and maybe would you agree with this even, is how a team operates in the preseason is that a direct reflection a lot of times of how they play early in the year? Like you'll see some teams. Let me ask you this question. I'll put it to you this way. You'll hear people say, "Man, that team got a lot better at the end of the year," which is a great compliment. But everybody wants to improve. Are there cases where the team just wasn't good enough at the beginning of the year? You see what I'm saying? And it's kind of like that kid that takes the pretest, right, and scores a 20%, and then they get a 60%, and hey, still an F, buddy, but you just got a 40% increase. You know what I mean? Like, so are there times where a team doesn't perform well enough in the early season, and is that a reflection on their preseason habits?
It certainly can be. I think there's some layers to unpack in a question like that, because
Oh yeah, it's pretty loaded, but for
I
sure, it
do
was a loaded
think,
question.
well, and the reason I say that is I do think as you enter each season, not all teams are created equally. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? So like if you throughout a 10-year career, we've all had that brand new roster. We've all had, oh man, we have a lot of kids coming back. We're way ahead. We know our drills. We know kind of what to expect. The expectations are set where we've jumped right in. We're way ahead of where we were last year, right? Or
Right.
then there's that other situation where, okay, we're not anywhere close to where we were last year. We're simply not going to have that in by the first scrimmage, or we're not going to be able to do this early in the year or whatever. And I do think so I think you have to be careful judging what you're saying on just winning and losing. Okay, obviously we all want to win, and we're going to try in that scouting report to have our kids ready for game 1 and game 4 and game 6. But there are certain rosters, and there are certain years, and there are certain schedules we play to where there is something to be said by getting better for the second half of the year, getting better. Can we be ready to compete for a sectional title? We're starting to make strides and so forth. So I understand what you're saying, and I think this is the point that I had down to start my notes, and maybe you can really help me with this, because this is something that I was awful at as a young. I shouldn't say awful, but I certainly didn't have a consistent identity. Um, but I've been able to get better and better as I get older. But I'll say this: as I've been older, I've been more in the assistant role, and I've been able to see it through a different lens than the pressure of the head coach, who's kind of responsible for what you just said, right? Why didn't they win
Right.
more in the first 5 games?
Right.
Um, and that's that creating the identity in terms of this is what our program does versus, oh, I've got this teaming in and I need to change.
Mhm.
As and here's what I mean by that. As a young coach, you're so prepared to, okay, this Friday night we play this team, and we got to do this, got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And you get your team ready and you go and you play, and then you get ready for the next opponent. You get ready for the next opponent, and before you know it, as a first year coach or as a young coach, your team's competing hard. You're competing on the scoreboard, but all of a sudden you get to game 7, 8, 9, 10. You're like, gosh, I don't know who we are. I don't know what we've really established.
Mhm.
Whereas going back to the beginning of the year, if you're taking more of the baby steps and you're doing the word process is thrown out there so much in sports today. People have different opinions of that. Okay. But the word process is thrown out there of, okay, we're going to be really good at this. And then we're going to get
Right.
really good at this. We're going to get really good at this. And as it starts to come together, we're going to start to play better and better and better. So that's why I say on your original thought there, Matt, there's two different ways to look at that in terms of there's a big difference in terms of going all in on game one and or starting to see big picture in terms of, okay, this is where I want my team to be by the Christmas break. This is where I want to be by tournament time. It might even be a young rebuilding process where you're saying this is where I want to be by next summer, and this is where I want to be by next opening day. Okay, so
Right.
I guess you see where I'm coming from there. I think when you ask that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is I think that question can be fair or unfair based on what type of team do you have? What experience level do you have? And in what year are you in? That's going to look different for a fifth year coach than it is for a first year coach at a particular school. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, it is, and I may not have asked the question exactly right in some ways either, because I hope I didn't say how many games did you win in the preseason. I wasn't. I know that's probably sounded like that. I guess what I was saying is, even if a team's not ready to win at first because of some of those reasons you mentioned, is it obvious there's still something there? You see what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
almost what you were saying of trying to develop an identity. Not every team's going to, I'm not saying that, because in all honesty, you could have a team that's 6-0 and a team that's 3-3, and the team that's 3-3 might be overachieving, and the team that's 6-0, I don't know how you underachieving if you're 6-0, although, but maybe you're just not playing well. Maybe you're just way better than everybody you've played, right? And you've played sloppy and you've gotten away with it or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? So I
Sure.
think whenever we talk about these things, I think it's important to preface it by saying we're talking about, are you performing up to your level or up to your ability level, right? Not every team's, like you say, created equally. So you can't just say, go off record, right? Well, this team's got 6 wins and this team's got 4 wins. You got to go off some other things sometimes, right? And so I guess for me, what I'm saying is, I think there are times when I watch a team in games 1, 2, or 3 where it's painfully obvious that there hasn't been maybe the type of preseason that was needed, right? To just get ready to be organized to play. Not basing that off of, oh, they were just overwhelmed talent wise tonight. I mean, I've had situations where my team's got beat by 20 points in the opening game because the other teams, like you said, is just further along, right? Maybe they're got a bunch of kids back. Maybe we got a bunch of new faces, and it is hard to get ready. I mean, when you start talking about the preseason, Shayne, and I mean, you're literally talking about a period of, in some cases, you know, 18, depending on like, your fall sports team success, right? Football, volleyball, whatever it is. There's times where you're literally talking about an 18 to 25 day period to get your team ready to play. Okay. I mean, if you think about that for a second. Okay. And you say to yourself, okay, I've got this month to get ready, but we're not going to practice on Sundays. We're not going to practice on Thanksgiving. We're going to try to fit 3, 4, 5 scrimmages in, right? Which are good for prep, but they're not a practice where you're really putting things in. And so all of a sudden you look up and we got to go out and toss the ball up for real tonight. And we've only had a handful of practices to try to get ready. And I think that's where where what you said is true. The experience you have, how many kids did you have coming back? Was it just review for your kids, or is it brand new information? And I think that's what kind of leads me into, maybe my first real point here, which is just the importance of, in the preseason, Shayne, of having a plan. I think that's the number one thing. Like, I think the coaches and the teams that do well have an organized, structured approach to their preseason. They have, it's not just like, what are we doing at practice today? I mean, there's literally like a short term, like, what are we doing at practice today? But it's also like, here's my month long plan. I mentioned in show 47, if you go back and listen, so I don't want to go over all of that again, how we used to do, how I've always done like a calendar, the month long calendar, like by game one, here's what I want to have in, right? And I work backwards from there. So to have that in by game one, I have to have this in by my 5th scrimmage, this in by my 4th scrimmage, this in by my 3rd scrimmage, right? And so you have your whole month laid out, and then you start working on your daily practice plans to fit into your monthly practice plans. So if that makes sense. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost the same way with teaching, right? You have a unit, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and what are you teaching each day to get to that final goal? But so for me, Shayne, I guess that and let me ask you this then. With that being said, with the organizational structure there, because one thing we didn't really dive into as much in show 47, and I really want to dive into tonight, and I think this is really, really important. You touched on it a little bit just now. Don't you have to tailor your preseason plan to your situation right then, your personnel and your current situation? So in other words, if you have a really, really experienced team, got a lot of kids back, a lot of stuff is going to be easy to get stuff in. A lot of it's review, and they're going to be pretty good. Well, now all of a sudden, maybe you take 5 scrimmages, and maybe you really challenge those guys. Maybe you have some really tough scrimmages where you might even go get beat. You might get some losses hung on you in the preseason, right? Versus if you have a team that's got a lot of young kids, maybe you need a scrimmage or two where you're the better team, where you can gain a little confidence. Maybe you need a scrimmage or two where you can go win, right? Where at least the kids know how it feels to win. And then mix in a scrimmage or two that are a little tougher after that. I mean, I used to be very, very careful how I put my scrimmage schedule together based on where I thought my team was at that point, right? And it also affects, I think, Shayne, how quickly you try to put stuff in, how much you try to do. What on my calendar, what am I going to expect my team to know by game 1? Well, it may be a little less on some years. It may be a little more. Let's face it, some years that playbook you may have to shrink that down a little bit based on what you have. So I think you have to tailor your entire preseason plan to where you're at that point as a group.
I like that thought because that there's times where a team, let's use an offensive analogy for a second. There's times a team offensively, you come in and your top 7 know your offense from an X and O standpoint. They at least know where to go, what it is you're trying to do. Okay, so they're starting to see some of the advanced concepts of some of the reads and some of the reactions and what's the defense taking away, what's the next option. Where there's other teams that are trying to dribble the ball into the scrimmage area and complete the first pass. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, right.
It's so so
I had a coach, Shane. I got to tell this. I had a coach one time say to me, he had a team that wasn't very good, and I said, how's practice going for it? And he's like, oh, he goes, right now we're doing some dribbling, and so I was like, oh, just trying to improve on your ball handling a little bit here early on. He's like, no, no, no. We haven't got the ball handling yet. We're just we're just trying to learn how to dribble right now. So when you said that, it kind of reminded me. You kind of reminded me, Shane, that sometimes you have to start slow.
it so again the thought kind of goes back to your pre-test. You're using some educational terms there like pre-test, backward design, those types of things. So you're trying to figure out, okay, what's this look like, where's my team at on the process. And here's one thing I hate, Matt, and I challenge all coaches at all ages, because older coaches are just as bad if not worse than younger coaches on this. the well, the kids just don't know the game, or they just don't. You have to coach your team from where they're at and try to get them as far along as you can. And if you decide not to come back next year, that's up to you. But you've already signed up for this year, so I'm just telling you what you have to do. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? Like it's just like when the kid comes into your math class. Well, the kid only knows 15% of their math facts. Well, that's where you start then. And by the end of the year, let's make sure they know more than 15.
Right.
No one said you had to teach them 100, but what's that added value? Again, to use an educational term. So I think that's really, really important because we've all been there in our most frustrating moments is, man, they just don't know the game or they just don't know, but that's the coaching part, right? So going back to your original point, the only reason I said that in response is I wanted to make sure people understand that you not in every situation you can't just determine your success based on did you win or lose. I mean, you have to be able to look at the progression. Obviously we want to win, but you have to be able to look at the progression. How many times in sports have you heard, we make that improvement from the first scrimmage to the second scrimmage, the first game to the second game? I think there's a lot of truth in that because, again, what's happening there is coaching. You're taking the pretest, right? You're putting them out there. And I like what you said about scrimmaging someone. Anytime you can scrimmage someone at least as good as you, preferably maybe even a little bit better, it exposes you. So what better time in a competitive day and age to go out and get exposed when it doesn't count on the record yet? Because what that does is it puts it right there on film. Okay, this is where we're at offensively. I don't need to be worrying about 7 quick hitters because we can't dribble the ball in the scrimmage area and make the first pass. You see,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
I don't need to worry about putting 5 trapping defenses in because we simply can't close out and get midline yet.
Right.
So it exposes you. Now, if on your more advanced teams, it might show you, oh, wait a minute, these kids have this. They're ready for that next step. I've got to push them forward here a little bit, and we're ready to get a little bit more dynamic in that read or this particular action here or whatever it is. But I do think there's something to be said for the organization of where are we at? Where would I like to get? When would I like to get there by? Okay.
Mhm.
And then utilizing those first practices, utilizing those because I bet you anything on that calendar you had, you put that plan down, but then I guarantee you revisited that calendar at least probably every day, but at least every other day to see, oh, wait a minute, that might not be realistic. We may have to scale back on that a little bit. We're not getting this. We got to have, you know what I mean? So I guess that's what I'm saying there. Are we on the same page in terms of what that vision looks like and what that pacing looks like in terms of the goal of what the coach is trying to accomplish with their particular teams?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any question. And you you actually said a couple things during that right there that got me thinking, sort of in a, I don't want to say a different direction, but sort of parallel to that maybe. It's so important in the preseason, Shayne. There's such limited time. I can't stress enough for people that have never coached. uh, I can't tell you how difficult the limited amount of time in the preseason is. All right, in terms of getting your team ready to play. And because of that, Shayne, I think you have to be really, really creative. And because the time management's obvious, right? You have to have a practice plan where you're getting the most out of your minutes on the court, right? But that's all. I mean, really, a good coach does that all the time, right? A good coach doesn't have 2 guys doing something and 12 people watching, right? I mean, there's a certain management to the practice, a certain layout, a certain organization, getting the most out of you, getting the, if you're in a drill, you're maximizing the shots you get up, whatever. But also, and I think this gets missed sometimes, if you're only going to take your on court time in the preseason, okay, and let's just say you get 2 hours, you get an hour and a half, you get 2 hours, whatever, and that's all you're going to do, and you're going to be like, okay, see you tomorrow. You're really missing opportunities in the preseason. To me, we used to talk to our players all the time about practices are going to be really, really long in the preseason. And they may not all be on the floor though. All right, because you have to utilize the meeting, okay, your team meetings, your film work. I mean, I didn't realize until I started talking to some coaches last year, because I guess when I got out of coaching, I was able just to go around and talk to some coaches and because when you're coaching, you're just sort of worrying about what you're doing, right? But as I got out and throughout the area, I'd run into coaches. Hey, how do you handle your preseason? Let me pick your brain. I didn't realize that coaches don't watch much film in the preseason. They don't meet a lot in the like I would tell any coach, if you get to game one and you haven't had 5 to 10 player meetings, I mean, we used to have a meeting every day. I mean, sometimes it lasted 3 minutes, right? You just get with your team, you go over stuff. But like in the preseason, I would have half hour sometimes player meetings with a PowerPoint where I'm going over culture and we're laying it out. You know, this is what we want our team culture to be. We'd let players participate in developing that culture. What do you guys think about this? What do you want our team rules to be? Like what do you think right here is fair? And this is, you know, having players be a part of that process and kind of creating ownership. You understand what I'm saying? And it's like, you know, we would have meetings. I mean, in the preseason, especially, we would meet all the time. You have to go over. Oh, we'd have parent meetings, which, you know, and then we'd. And in every scrimmage, you sit down and you watch film. You have to watch film. I mean, we live in a day and age where film is just there and not to utilize it. So I think there's a lot of coaches that kind of, let's get in the gym, let's get our work done, let's go for an hour and a half, let's go for an hour 45, and then they get dressed and go home. There needs to be, you need to be sitting in a classroom with those kids 2, 3 times a week going over this stuff in the preseason. Now, when you get later in the season, your practices will probably be shorter. We know that. You start to cut back a little bit, you know, to save on their legs some. And but I would argue, no matter what point of the season, you should be watching film, constant, as much film study as you can get in. And so to me, Shayne, I guess my point to all that is are you maximizing your time in the preseason, not just your on court time, but your ability? Because no matter what your gym space is, right? No matter what your situation is, well, we don't have much of gym space and we can only get an hour and a half. You still got a chance to sit in a classroom and watch film and meet and talk and go over things. And I just don't know if that's happening everywhere.
Well, it's an incredible point, and it's probably become my favorite part of coaching. And the big thing that started here in this generation with the bigger, faster, stronger, and all the workouts is the weightlifting. I think more and more basketball coaches probably have found a way to incorporate into their schedule, as you say,
Right.
opportunity to do some different lifts or some different type of workouts, something, in terms of the bigger, faster, stronger categories. I think that's one. The classroom's a really interesting thing. The communication's so important. I would argue that a half hour in the classroom could save you at least that on the basketball court, because when
Right.
you're communicating certain things, when you're taking a look, you know I even think, if you have a film of practice, hey, here's this drill yesterday. Here's what we want to do in this drill. And by the time you go to that drill the next time, you may say 15 minutes because you've already cleaned the drill up. So now you're concentrating on what the drill was for in the first place, right? Not what line to go to or not what to do here, but you're actually coaching the skill. You
Shayne,
make
I don't want to interrupt you. I'll give you an example. I want to say two things real quick. Did you know? We're sitting here. I mean, this is our show for you. We're always unscripted, right? But did you know that Huddle is coming out with a thing where you've got, it's called like instant replay. I just heard about this. Literally heard about this today. Where if your gym has the Huddle camera, right, which most gyms do now, that if you have an iPad in practice with you or TV or whatever you can have in there, that you can literally immediately go to that and say, guys, look right here. We just ran a drill. Look at this drill real quick. Our midline's terrible. And show your team right then. You know what I'm saying? Like, my point is, how cool is the technology now that some of this
Mhm.
stuff is out there. We used to have a volleyball coach at Vinton County who had a TV on a stand, okay, and they were filming the kids as they hit in practice. And when they went to the end of the line, they could watch themselves hit. It was on a delay, so like they hit, they run to the end of the line, they watch, they go hit again, they run to the end of the line and watch. They're literally getting instant video feedback. My point is we have this technology. We've got to use it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I really wanted to throw that in there just as a point of we need to be utilizing this stuff.
Well, it's a great point of maximizing the time. Again, what's been the excuse? You laid the excuse out there. Oh, we just don't have very much time. I only
Right.
had an hour and a half. Can't get a gym. Well, again, you can put in the time. You can have the team, so you can have one-on-one sessions. A lot of times, having the the small group sessions can be very, very valuable. Do you have your older kids trained properly? Are they meeting? I've always had that point guard bias. Are you on the same page with your point guard? Developing that point guard communication, it can help in basketball areas, in terms of turnovers, tempo, all these different things, and that relationship that you form. These things happen through communication. It's role identification. It's learning how to do film. It's learning how to do scouting report. And I've never believed that, oh well, these kids aren't quite ready for a scouting report. They don't know the game. Well, you just contradicted yourself. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like the first thing I would tell that coach in return is, no, no, no. It sounds like your team needs film and needs scouting report more than ever, right? Because you're
Right.
telling me what their basketball IQ needs to come up. Well, that's where it comes from. So I couldn't agree more. There has to be an opportunity. Like I get a chance next week. Um, to work with some junior high kids, and they were saying, how much time you need. I said, well, I take whatever time you want. I said, but honestly, I'm gonna bring some paper and pencil, and I like to do a classroom session with them. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's
Yeah.
one of those things where I can teach them far more in a classroom setting than I can doing a 15-minute defensive drill. Does that make sense? Like in terms
Oh,
of,
yeah, there's no question. I mean, when coaches, and you just said it, when when coaches blame their kids, okay, it when it comes to stuff like that, it really it kind of baffles you, because it's like, you know, it's our job as coaches to be the ones to teach to teach. We've all had kids that caught on faster. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's an uphill battle, okay, and sometimes from a general fan, it may look like we never get there, right? Because you coach a team all year long and they just never kind of get. But as a coach, we should see the improvement, right? We should know that, hey, maybe we improved from terrible to bad, but we improved something. I mean, there has to be some level of improvement there. And I think that's what you're saying with like knowledge of the game. We have to, as coaches, take time to teach those things so that they get better.
we have to speak a certain language. I always talk about that in terms of all programs or all groups of people. Basketball's been around a long, long time. There's a lot of different ways to say it. There's a lot of different ways to teach it. In a program specific way, are your players, and more importantly, players of all ages throughout your program, speaking a common language? So what I mean by the classroom session, it could be a vocabulary list, it could be a fill in the blank, it can be a scenario thing, it could be a scenario thing followed by a film clip, and then yeah, maybe we'll walk out on the floor and show it a little bit. But now you might say, well, Shayne, that's a lot of time to take in the preseason. Okay, maybe it is, but that half hour I've spent in the classroom or in the walkthrough, you don't understand how much more purpose I've brought to every defensive drill we're going to do for the next month. You know what I'm saying? Because you're
Right.
always going to have that. But if you just walk right on the floor and you start saying, well, close out on the top shoulder and force it to the short corner, and then get your backside here, drop on the backside, get lower than the ball, and you're saying all these different things, and you just said you have kids that don't know the game as well. You're speaking a foreign language, right? So it's like anything else. If you're starting to speak the common language and everyone kind of knows the vocabulary, now as you're talking to them in the drill and as you're starting to do things are starting to make sense. And then it's a step by step process, and it's that back and forth from the film room to the floor, from the film room to the floor. And you're going to mess it up. You want to mess it up. You want to put the mess up on film, right? Hey, this is what it
Right.
looks like.
Yeah.
Then, a lot of times if I'm putting a note on there, I'll say, hey, younger kids, check this out right here. This is textbook, and I'll show it being done right. You know what I mean? And like,
Right.
and you see it. Oh, okay, I can do that, and and you go. So a lot of times, you evaluate. I was just watching a film the other night of a preseason scrimmage of a particular team playing, and they were doing a nice job based on like 5 practices.
Mhm.
It's not going to be perfect, right? It's 5 practices. It was a young basketball team, and they actually gave up a layup on a pretty good defensive possession where they guarded for about 14, 15 seconds, and then on the layup, they literally had about 3 kids that were one step away from being where they're supposed to be.
Mhm.
And at the varsity level, that's a layup. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's an easy fix. But my point is, you need that mess up on film so that you can see it and then you can bring it back to the practice field. I just feel like too many times, Matt, we just kind of roll the ball out and play, and I think that's okay. But there has to be a true breakdown of really learning what it is you're trying to do. And I just think the classroom and the film room are way too valuable. So I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
that looks different for everybody, but it needs to be a part of what they do for sure.
yeah, and you bring up a great point because I mean, obviously, the learning part of using the film to your advantage and the classroom to your advantage is crucial. But but it also can help teams, I think, or I always felt like it can help. And you're at the school you coach at, the boys program experiences this a lot because the football team's usually in the playoffs, right? And they get their kids a little bit later. Most schools now, again, if your football program's good at all, they're making the playoffs, and if they're really good, they very well might go 2 rounds even, right, and dip into your
Mm-hmm.
basketball even more. My point is, when these football players come into basketball, you have to be extremely careful. I've always felt like, and I don't know your opinion on this, but I think you have to be extremely careful as a basketball coach not to push them physically too early. I think it's tempting because you're so gung ho as a basketball coach, and you want to say, "Let's go, man! We got to get started." And what I just say, right? We only got 18 practices, and we got to get this stuff in. But then all of a sudden, if you push those kids too early, right, they burn out physically. They haven't had time to recoup. I talked to a football kid the other day. How's basketball going? He's like, oh, it's going all right. He goes, man, that ball feels like a foreign object in my hand. I don't even, I mean, it doesn't even feel right to me yet. But my point is this, Shayne, it doesn't hurt their legs to be in the classroom. You know what I mean? Again, use that time. So that's a way, honestly, if maybe you had a 2-hour practice last night and you say, you know what? I want our football kids. I want to save their legs a little bit today, So let's do some skill work and then let's come in and really dive into some film stuff and some classroom stuff, some culture stuff, whatever, And now you've had an effective practice without physically, because I think again, as a coach, you have to juggle that a little bit and you have to show a little patience at times. It's so hard to juggle urgency and patience, and you have urgency in the preseason of you're fired up. I mean, one, as a coach, you've got energy, right? You just started and you're excited, man, let's go. We're here again. It's time, and you're ready to just dive in head first. But you got these kids who have just come off a football field that have just beaten each other up for 12 weeks, 11 weeks, whatever. It's tough. So I think again, some of that classroom work can be effective that way too.
Well, you mentioned the fall sports. So here in our area, obviously on the volleyball side, if people are familiar with Side Valley Conference volleyball, it's second to none. So you're rarely going to have your girls on time, right?
Right.
We have some great cross country representation. We have some great soccer teams, boys and girls. We've had some golfers playing at a high level, and then you mentioned football. Um, with so some of the programs that are automatically going to play into the 11th week, maybe even the 12th and 13th week now. So it cuts into that calendar that you talked about, right? As a coach, my calendar said I had to have this in this week. You just better be real careful. As you said, I've had a lot of experience with this with athletes coming out of the fall, and I'm telling you where it catches up with you is right around January. You might think that, oh, they're 15, 16, 17 years old, let's go, let's play. I'm telling you right now, when they start getting into that higher level of football and they start playing into that 12th and 13th week, some of the level that they're playing at, not every high school body is made for that.
Right.
You know, volleyball maybe not as physically demanding, but again, you're talking about you know these seasons nowadays, Matt. Let's face it; these teams that are playing into the regional volleyball, you know as well as I do, you have a bunch of club volleyball kids, and they're playing 2 and 3 sports overlap. And at some point, you just better be aware of that. I'm not saying to baby them; I'm just saying to be aware of that. And I love what you said about having different ways to teach the game and to get your stuff in than to just going all out. Because here's the other thing too. I'm not a big fan of practicing at a 20, 30% on the court. When you're on the court, I want to be clear about this. When you're on the court, I want to see us go. All
Right.
right. I want to see us
Yeah.
work hard. It's not a good habit to get into.
Mm.
Hey, let's just kind of jog through this.
No,
Wouldn't you
you
ever say
you
that
might
as a
you
coach?
might shorten things up to a half hour, but you're going to go hard for
Yes.
a half hour. Right.
So
Right.
right. So I would argue I would argue that the classroom session or the film session where you're specifically looking. And here's the other thing you do in your preparation. A lot of times you organize film. It's not just randomly play a film. You may have
No, no, you've
15
got it
clips
clipped
ready
out.
to
Right.
go and this is what we're working on. You might even have some of your older players talk about different things and the great Bobby Knight, obviously so many things here with his passing recently. They talked about, and one of the things I loved one time, you talk about putting yourself in position to challenge yourself as a coach, bring your kids together. I heard him telling a group of coaches one time, if you want to know if you're communicating well or not, bring your kids over to the huddle, sit them down, and and organize your huddle. Here's another preseason thing. I've coached with some people and coached for some people where they wanted you sitting in a certain spot. Hey, when we sprint over here, I need whoever's in the game right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I know who's in the game at what position, and
Uh-huh.
then how we huddle up and so forth. Other people maybe don't do that. That's just an organization. But here's what Bobby Knight says: tell them without drawing it up. Tell them exactly what you want on this possession out of the huddle, and instead of having them go out and do it, when you are done with the huddle and you guys break down, immediately hand them a piece of paper and a pencil and have them all separately without helping each other draw up what you just said. What's that look like? Yeah.
Well,
And
that's that. Yeah, that's pretty
you
cool.
talk about getting some immediate feedback. I would even challenge coaches like I actually use this. I've actually used this in some different leadership things where I was working with a group of leadership council in terms of some kids at school here a while back. I ended up stealing it from Coach Knight, where it was telling for me. Well, wait a minute. I must have done a really good job of explaining this, this, and this, but man, I must have been terrible at this because every kid across the board had no idea what I was talking about. And that made me a better speaker. I actually went back to them, brought them back together, and we went back over that and it improved. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
It's a situation of how are they interpreting it? And that's just an example. So I don't want to just be a person who gets on here and says, hey, do film work. Hey, do classroom session. I want to give the examples. Like when I say classroom sessions early in the year, I'm I'm literally treating it like a classroom. I'm giving vocabulary lists. I'm giving scenarios. I'm giving different things. I'm giving lecture notes on how, on like you said, I think you talk about culture and some different things. But we're talking about all those things, and then in the film work, we're breaking down those particular things. Hey, when I use this vocabulary word, this is what it looks like on defense. This is what we're referring to as top shoulder. This is what we're referring to in tree the post. This is what we want
Mhm.
on the full front of the post. This is what we want when we drop on the backside. And all of those different things are so important because if all you do is throw that first year kid out there, that second year kid out there, and you start going live and you start yelling out all these things, what you find is 2 and 3 weeks later, they're still not going to know what those words mean. You know what I mean? Their head's spinning and they're just not going to make the improvement you want them to make.
Yeah, as we talk here, Shayne, so much of the preseason is the basics, right? You're trying to get started and you're trying to get sort of a base or a foundation for your season. Let's face it, even the good teams, right, are putting in their out of bounds plays, or putting in their, they're doing those basic things. But but when you coached, did you ever find yourself, and because I really believe sometimes the best coaches do this, with that all that foundation work and just kind of getting started, did you also find yourself sort of thinking ahead a little bit in terms of, for us to reach our goals this year, or based on whatever type of team you felt like you had, these were going to be the biggest games on our schedule, and these were the teams we were going to have to eventually beat. Okay, so and again, this could go for anybody, not just if you're a great team. You might be thinking about, the district finals, right? Or something. Um, if you're a mediocre team, you might be thinking we might be able to finish top half of our league this year. And to finish top half of our league, we need to beat this team here, right? We probably, it might be hard to beat the number 1 and 2 team in the league. We may not be to that level yet, but if we're going to finish top half, I had a guy one time, he was a volleyball coach, and he eventually won a state championship. And he told me, now again, he was coaching an elite group of kids, obviously at that time. So his thought process wasn't on, you know, just winning his league. I mean, that was sort of a given with the team he had, quite frankly. But it was more of eventually, who am I going to have to beat? Whether that be in the regional finals or the regional semis, and almost developing a framework like what he wanted to do as a team was developed around that idea. Not that he didn't care about the other games, not that he didn't care about the fundamentals. Do you feel like you have to have a long-term vision in the preseason too? I guess is what I'm getting at, where you're thinking ahead to ultimately, I think I have this type of team this year. I think this team's capable of winning a league championship. I think this team's capable of winning a district championship. And to do that, what is my team going to have to look like come, March the 15th when I'm in the district tournament? What's my team going to have to look like? And do you have to also put that in the back of your head when you're putting your practice plans together and when you're doing things?
Yeah, that's really interesting because there's two thoughts that come to my mind. I feel like as a younger coach, I went way too fast. I feel like as an older coach, I go way too slow. Sometimes I'm guilty of taking too long to put things in. Yeah, if that makes sense. Like back
Right,
back when I first started teaching, or back when I first, I may want to teach them how to write the entire essay the first week of school. I'm just gun ho, right?
right,
Where now I may be on the introduction paragraph till Christmas, and the people I'm teaching with are like, "Hey, come on, man, we gotta go. We gotta do this, and that." So I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I'm saying that like that's probably something as I self reflect on myself. Sometimes I go too slow nowadays. Now, the point you make there kind of correlates with that, and it's a really interesting one of where's the team at? What are they trying to accomplish? So, I think back to a baseball analogy. We were fortunate enough to win 2000, I think it was 14 district championship Paint Valley in a year where we probably weren't supposed to. Well, then we came back in 15, a little bit more of a bullseye on us. We went back to the regional that year and lost to an incredible Newark Catholic team in a tough game. Then had a lot of kids come back to 16, but we moved up a division. My point is, each year, a little bit of what you're saying, yes, that did cross my mind in terms of, man, we need to do certain things to be able to play at that level, man, to play at that level, to play at that level. But if I'm being but if I'm being honest, there's other years in basketball, baseball, whatever it may be that you're coaching, you're still thinking about what do I have to do to help our team be in the best position to maybe be ready to compete come tournament time? And that might be going all the way back to the beginning of tonight's show in terms of, well, man, this may look completely different. We're not even ready to talk about what it's like to play with the most, the elite teams in the sectional right now. Because again, we're back at that stage where we're trying to dribble the ball past half court and make an entry pass. You see what I'm saying? So like,
right,
I I like what you're saying. I think sometimes it looks different in terms of it may not even be the best teams on your schedule. The wording might be, for me at least, tell me if this makes sense. It might be what's the best level, what's the top level of team that I think we are ready to compete with, and how can we beat them? You see what I'm saying?
right,
If you're being, we're all competitive, but if you're a realist, I'm sure there's a lot of basketball coaches that look at their schedule right now. Not that they're not going to try like heck, but they're probably looking at like 6, 7 teams. Man, I just don't know if we're ready to play at that level yet. You know what I
right,
mean? Like,
right,
it doesn't mean you're not going to try. It just means that realistically, we're not quite there yet. And those are the types of games where you're going to get exposed, and it's how you learn from them and go that takes it. So it's I guess that's an interesting point. I hope I answered your question, because it was
yeah,
two layers to me there in terms of it's the expectation, and then it's the having the reaction to the expectation.
Yeah, no, no, I get it, and I think that's a good point. I think I think there has to be with a coach, as much as we hate to admit it, some level of realistic expectation. Not that you're even going to come out and say that stuff out loud, but we all sort of know where our teams are at, and I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier. You got to be careful not to sacrifice your long term, what you want your team to be at the end of the season for maybe a little bit of a short term gain that might not even be enough of a short term game to win. You got to kind of stay the course a little bit, or like you said earlier, the process. I think sometimes, the teams that do best early in a season, they just find a way to sort of play clean, like clean up the game a little enough to like get started. Because did you ever notice? I feel like high school basketball in the first week or two of the season's pretty sloppy at times. It can be a little sloppy because, again, with the way the schedule's set up, there's not a lot of practice time. The high school games become super, super physical. We're going to talk about that a little bit in future episodes with some of the rule changes this year that might help that. We won't get into that tonight, but so a lot of times, those teams that can have a 3-0, 4-0 start are just the teams that can figure out a way to handle the chaos, and just work through some of that stuff, because even good teams oftentimes in the preseason, Shayne, I think win ugly a little bit. When I say the preseason, not the preseason, but your first couple non-league games or whatever,
Well,
your
don't
early
you
games.
always hear in sports, you better get them early
Yeah,
because they're going to start to go. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think there's a lot of upsets. Or who was it? James Madison that just went into Michigan State earlier this year
right.
and won. Yeah, it's no matter what level of basketball we're talking about. I think early on there are different teams, even in terms of talent level, that might be at a different age and stage of their development when it comes to that. I think that's a fair. Do you agree with the defense is ahead of offense? Has that been your experience, and why?
Well, to be honest with you, it has been my experience for a couple reasons. I think really good coaches understand that you have to start with defense. You have to set a tone on your team that defense matters and that you're going to play it. I have yet to ever watch a great team, win championships that didn't play defense. And I guarantee you, I've never heard a coach be like, you know what, we've got some kids that can really score it, so we've kind of just basically said we don't care about defense this year. You know what I mean? Like there's no good coach ever who has uttered those words. They understand that defense matters, that you have to establish that early on. You have to have some, and defense takes a lot of practice, right, to be good at. I mean, there's a lot of breakdown drills and, you know, doing little short-sighted things, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, so it takes a lot of practice time, and coaches understand that, so they tend to get into that quicker, before they really get into their offensive stuff. And then, to be honest with you, I think reason number two is what I said before. The game's gotten really physical. So when you get into the season and the defense is playing really, really physical, um, scrimmages tend to be extremely physical at times. So it becomes a little harder to score. So your offense is just a little sloppy. Um, those things working together, I guess, the physicality, maybe not quite being in rhythm yet, due to putting more of your emphasis on the defensive side in practice. I think all those things lead to that. Yeah, I don't think there's any question that the defense, uh, is ahead of the offense.
Well, I think
Go
conditioning
ahead.
is a big factor there too. I think on the offensive side, is you're handling the ball and you're running the floor and you're passing and catching cleanly and your and
Uh,
offense is rhythm, right? You're playing in rhythm. And a lot of times kids haven't been in the gym. We just talked about all the volleyball players and all the soccer players and all the football players. Well, how much have they been shooting the basketball, if we're being honest, in the last, what, 2 or 3 months?
right.
Um, so all of those things are a factor. And I think the only thing I would caution coaches sometimes is you want the effort, you want the technique, but you have to really be careful of fool's gold. I think sometimes throughout the summer, throughout the preseason, the trapping defense or the pressing defense or a lot of those different things, you may catch different teams at different ages and stages that, well, maybe they didn't have their press breaker in, or hey, I played that 1-3-1 there and I just see us turn them over and it was the first
Right.
scrimmage and they just got out of football. They didn't have their half court breaker in. I mean,
Right.
you play them a month from now, they might shred you.
Yeah.
It's so it's again, it's that back and forth chess game of know your team, know where you're at. What's this look like? Scrimmage properly to where you can get exposed. Yeah, that way you get honest feedback on your in your film session. So I just think those are some things in my notes there that
Yeah. Yeah,
offense
definitely.
is certainly behind, but there's some things that are going to naturally even out probably, what would you say, within the first month of the season.
Yeah, no doubt. And it kind of leads me, Shayne, to the last thing I wanted to ask you before we get into final thoughts, but I wanted to hit you with this. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit because again, we really purposely don't do a lot of pre-show prep, right? But um, if you were going to tell somebody, if a fan of basketball, okay, says, hey, listen, you've coached for a long time. I'm getting ready to go out. I'm going to go watch, the Zane Trace Tip-Off Classic, or I'm going to watch the first. I've got my schedule out here. The first week of the season, I'm going to see, 10 basketball games, and what should I look for? Like if I was going to say, hey, if I'm trying to pick who the best teams are going to be, okay, if I'm quote unquote picking the favorites, right? What are some things I'm looking for? Assuming, okay, because the obvious answer is talent. Okay, I get that, but like assuming that the talent, Shayne, is somewhat equal. You know what I mean? Like, okay, these teams are both really talented, or these teams here are both equally mediocre in terms of talent. Whatever. Okay, but assuming that's equal, what are some of the things somebody could watch in the first couple weeks of the season and really pay attention to that would maybe translate to either long-term success or long-term failure if they don't get them fixed, right? Some specific things. I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I've got a couple in my notes, but
No,
but I'll
I
give I'll
love
give I'll give you the opportunity to say it first.
I love the question because again, if I follow the question, we're kind of taking the obvious. Oh, well, that team has a 6-5 Division
No,
One
no, right.
college
I'm
player.
saying I'm
We're
saying
taking that stuff out. So
whoever
so
you're
we're talking
comparing
about
is
just your
somewhat.
everyday high school basketball teams, boys, girls, whatever. That they're coming out, they're taking the floor, and they're just playing.
Yeah, or
And
or two teams you're comparing that maybe are elite, but whatever. But I'm
mhm,
saying, assuming that you're comparing teams that are relatively equal and you're trying to predict who's going to be better a month from now. Does that make sense?
yeah,
What are you looking for?
the word that comes to my mind is connected. And here's what I mean by that. When I'm watching a team play, I've been doing this long enough. It doesn't take me long to figure out if they like one another, if they're playing for a common goal, if they're playing for each other. I'm looking for communication, but I'm looking for not just, when I say communication, I'm not just saying how they communicate and how they play the game together and how they play off of one another. I'm also talking how they treat one another. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, do do they run to help each other up? Are there high fives, like coaching? We've all had that player come off the floor that doesn't give us a real, glad to be coming out of the game high five, right? It's one of
Right.
those things. Like, I know this sounds funny, but like just when they slap a five, or when they on an assist, do they give a little point? Are they connected on the defensive end? Are they communicating, and are they trying to be ready and to help? um, I could go on and on about that, but I guess in terms of their bench behavior, their excitement for one another,
Oh
their
yeah.
their genuine play for one another, I guess that's one of the first things that screams success to me. Is that? I mean, that's just. I guess that's my first honest answer, not
Yeah,
knowing what
no, and I
question's coming.
think
Is that fair?
yeah, no, I think that's a great starting point, obviously. I mean, one of the things, you know, we talk about all the time, and I don't think kids understand this. Again, these are things that you need to go over in the preseason with your players, is the body language and how you act and what all these things go a long way into your entire team, like chemistry and really what you're all about. Like you're setting, I'll give you an example. I'll go ahead and name the girl. I mean, we're gonna occasionally name SVC players this year, I'm sure. And this girl's already graduated, but the girl that played for Paint Valley a couple years ago, Olivia Smith, right? Was that her name?
Hmm.
The one that averaged like 46 rebounds a game, it seemed like, right? She got a rebound
She
like on,
was she was Ross County's all-time leading rebounder, and she was
yes.
like 5 foot whatever.
but
Yeah.
you know what impressed me more than that? I was at a game. Now you got to understand something, okay? How many games Paint Valley girls basketball do you think I got to watch in a season? I mean, I was coaching at Benton County at the time, and even though I would watch you guys on film sometimes, but I'm saying I didn't get to come to very many games, right? I happened to be at a game. It was at Uniota, oddly enough. I was still at Benton County. My son was in the pep band. That's the only reason I made the trip over that night. And of course, really good friends with Jeff Miller. Obviously, enjoyed watching you coach. So it was just a perfect night for me to be there. And this girl gets taken out of the game due to foul trouble. And she is cheering her teammates on at a level with such intensity that at one point you had to jump up off the bench and grab her and pull her back because she was out in front of the scores table cheering on one of her teammates. I mean, she was cheering, like she was like pumping her fists and let's go. This girl could have easily been sitting there pouting, right, about being out of the game. Well, I'm out of the game, or even if she's not pouting, well, I'm gonna go grab a drink of water, grab a towel, do something else for a minute. How many kids do you see come off the bench and they just walk down to the end, they grab them a drink, they sit down, they're half paying attention. You have to ask yourself, like, how invested are they in their teammates? I'll never forget that. I mean, this girl, I've never met this girl hardly, you know what I mean, other than to say hello. And I'll never forget that. You've heard me bring that story up before, Shayne, of how much of an impact that had that night when I saw that happen. So I think players need to understand sometimes you can really your body language, how you act when even when you're not in the middle of the play matters.
And what I'll do to tie the whole show together is I'll say this: um, you have to teach that stuff as well.
Yeah,
Now, there's certain kids that are just special and they have that it factor about them, right? But what I'm saying throughout your whole culture, you have to highlight that. When we're doing film session, you have to highlight, hey, I love these three teammates sprinting over to help this person up who just ended up taking the
right.
charge. Or you see a big three on film. I love to highlight the bench. Hey, everyone pay attention to the bench reaction when this ball goes through the net right here. And you'll see 4 or 5 people jumping up and doing the different thing. You know what I'm saying? Like that's investment. So like when you tell me what am I watching for? If I'm just watching two equal teams and I'm putting talent aside for a second, because let's
Right.
face it, talent helps. You know what I mean? Like,
Bro, yeah,
the team with the all Ohio guards going to be pretty good. Okay.
right.
But all that aside, those are the things I'm looking for. And I'm telling you, you have to coach. I know certain coaches have rules on how you're going to act when a kid comes out of the game. Okay.
Right.
And the point is, maybe it is intentional the first time, or maybe it's because I had to, but after a while, you know what it does is it becomes the way we do it. And it
Hmm.
becomes a culture piece and it goes. So, you know, you have to be who you are. I don't know if, you make people stand up off the bench and slap a five or do whatever.
Right.
I know some coaches, they'll carry a towel out and they'll throw a towel their way or whatever it might be. My point is, there has to be a connection to where each person is invested for the other people that are out there on the court, and they're all trying to play for a common purpose.
Yeah. And I don't think there's any question, Shayne, it's those intangibles is where it all starts. Since you answered that question with those intangibles, I'll finish it with this. If someone was in that situation watching two teams relatively equal play and they actually wanted a basketball type of stat or whatever to look at, right? The two that jump out at me, and maybe I'm forgetting one that you could add, because if you're not trying to ask someone to watch 15 different things, and sometimes it's hard to say, well, see how good they are defensively. Well, a lot goes into that, right? I mean, like, unless you really understand what you're looking for, you may miss some things there. A team could look good defensively and maybe not be as good as you think. But two things that you could any fan could watch and pick up on. Shoot, you could take a piece of paper out and mark them down. Are turnovers and rebounds. Okay, like those two things to me, if I was going to take a separating factor and say, okay, these two teams are relatively equal, what could I kind of chart tonight to see which direction these teams are going? It'd be those two things. I feel like the teams that really rebound the ball at a high level, that's something that they can sustain the whole year. You understand what I'm saying? That's not something, here today, gone tomorrow. If you're a good rebounding team, a team just doesn't accidentally, rebound the ball really well for 2 games and then forget how to do it. Typically, that's an effort thing. That's something that a coach emphasizes, the players take pride in, and some teams don't. And rebounding for some teams an issue. And then the turnovers, right? And again, early season, you're going to have some turnovers, but are they like habitual type things, like, ooh, that's something they're going to do a lot? Or is it just early season blues, right? Like, hey, okay, that's a really good player right there. He saw the right pass and he tried to make it, but he just didn't. He threw it off target just a little bit and went out of bounds, versus the kid that tried to go through his legs 6 times and throw a behind the back pass into the third row. Those are things, so there's different types of turnovers. But I'm saying, is a team just turning it over because it's early season and they're a little rusty, or is it something you think, if that makes sense, it's going to be kind of habitual? So I think those are a couple areas, because if you think about it, those two things either add or subtract possessions. They add or
Possession,
subtract
sure.
shots. Like,
Yeah.
if you rebound the ball really well, you get more shots, right? You
Hmm.
get some offensive rebounds, or you prevent the other team from getting an extra shot. If you turn the ball over, those are shots you don't get, and that the other team does, right? So those
Hmm.
two stats, I think, for me, would be the two to watch.
Well, I love that because, we've talked about possessions before, but the other thing I always throw in anytime someone starts talking about rebounding and turnovers is those things just put you at a disadvantage, right? If you turn it over, particularly live, you're at a disadvantage. If you give up a rebound, you're at a disadvantage. They're
Right.
getting an extra shot at the basket and you're out of position, which maybe means a foul, or even a defensive rebound. Now you're forced to come back and transition. So I love those two things because if you are winning those two categories more times than not, you're playing basketball with far more of an advantage, which obviously means good things are going to happen. So I think that's very very fair, especially in a matchup where teams are evenly matched.
Yeah, and Shayne, let me say this as sort of my final thought, then I'll turn it over to you. I know I don't, I know this has been a good show. I know we've went a
Hmm.
while here, and I know that this is what's going to happen because we love talking basketball, right? So I'm sure most of our shows will be like this, and we could go on and on. But let me wrap it up by saying this, I guess, like to me, the importance of the preseason, it's kind of like the golf tournament, where you say that you can't win the tournament in the first round, but you can lose it, right, in the first
Hmm.
round. I almost kind of equate that to the preseason. Like, you're not going to win a championship just because of your preseason, but I think you could lose at one. I think that it's awfully difficult to overcome a really bad preseason. I think that you really need an effective quality preseason to get off on the right foot, to kind of lay the foundation for your program. Because if not, you're going to find yourself trying to catch up all year long. You're going to find yourself on Christmas break thinking, well, we probably should have did this in the preseason, but here we are now. We're going to have to kind of start, and you're always going to kind of running behind. So I guess some of the things we've talked about tonight, I hope coaches can use or do, and I think they'll help, because again, it's really, really important to value that preseason.
I love what we've done with tonight's show, and I think the key is going to be throughout the season is we're going to be able to take some of the individual things we've talked about tonight and break them down, be it from statistics or bringing in what a film session looks like, what's a classroom session look like, you know, you're analyzing the game, analyzing a matchup, all those different things I think could almost be individual shows. And I think that's what I appreciate about the opportunity is we talk leadership so much on expanding the zone throughout. What's funny is as we talk about these particular things, it just screams leadership, right? It screams organization, it screams time management, all these different things that we've talked about for 50 some odd shows now and expanding the zone, I think are still going to be evident in all these basketball shows that we do. So Matt, on that note, I will thank Dr. Chris Good one more time for all the support. I will say that we'd love to hear your feedback. svcsportzone.com on Twitter. Let us know any different ideas for show topics that you have, because we have 4 or 5 different things that we look forward to doing, but we'd love to get your thoughts. And as we're out more and more games, we're going to try to tie in some local situations to it as well. So Matt, a lot of fun. I look forward to a great basketball season. But I'm sure that the opportunities will be endless in terms of some of the show topics, and I look forward to breaking it down with you. So on that note, I'm Shayne Combs. He's Matt Combs. Thanks for listening to Expanding the Zone.